Welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm your host of the podcast and also the founder of ScaleHR. And so we have a fantastic episode topic today, and it's called From Overwhelm to Overflow, the neuroscience of better leadership. So what does that mean? I have no idea right now, but we will find out soon. So I'm going to bring in our guest shortly, but I actually know what it means. But I was just joking around because sometimes my topic can be a little bit confusing sometimes. But this is a really good episode. Before I get to the actual topic, I just want to say that our podcast is on our website, ScaleHR.com, also on YouTube as well. So I currently want to hit that bell button because then you'll be notified when new episodes are dropped, usually on Thursday mornings. And so that's like our target. So once a week, we will be launching our podcast in 2026 on just other podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so on. And so for those of you who prefer audio only, your wish will be granted. So having said that, I just want to get right to our topic. So this is a really interesting topic, and so I want to point out the first point that I want to make to kind of frame this conversation is around what's called the overwhelm epidemic. And so I know that some of you have probably heard that term before, and I think most leaders today are really operating in a constant state of mental overload. Email, Slack, outcome, meeting, fires to put out. This isn't really new, but I think it's even more in overblown mode because of obviously things like AI and Slack and social collaboration, virtual work, and so on. And so when this overwhelm becomes your default setting, basically, it doesn't just affect productivity, it also changes how you think, react, and lead. And so that's a really critical point. And so today we're going to talk about why that happened, and most importantly, how leaders can break this cycle. And the second point is leading from the inside out. And so what that really means is, what's really fascinating is the sustainable leadership change doesn't start with new tools, okay, new habits or new leadership models. It starts here in the brain. And so this is actually really interesting, and you want to hone in on that when we talk to our guest. And then, so on that point, using neuroscience, we can literally rewire stress patterns and move leaders from a survival mode to a place of clarity, creativity, and what our guest calls overflow. Okay. And that shift doesn't just transform the actual person, it transforms the culture around them. So I've already set the context. A really interesting episode. I know, for all of you leadership buffs and HR practitioners out there, this is one that you are going to want to watch. So Rebecca Bitton, I just want to welcome you to the Unmuted Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. It's been a pleasure to watch us both kind of go through this journey. It was amazing to actually put kind of these tools and these ideas onto your stage over at SocialHRCamp Toronto not too long ago. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to dive deep into this topic.
Yeah, I mean, this one you could probably spend hours on it, I think, but obviously we're going to keep this short and sweet. For a guest watching, can you just tell us a bit about what you do?
Absolutely. So I am the founder of Be and Become Consulting. And what I do is I help leaders gain the resilience, skills, and training to regulate their nervous systems so that they can show up to their teams and really embody their culture in the ways that are grounded and regulated so that they are really kind of stepping away from being reactive and to actually be more responsive, more present, and to also really just establish a sense of psychological safety in the workplace so that the culture that HR leaders and their teams work so hard to create actually sticks and is actually expressed through what I call the micro moments of our everyday. And so it's really about kind of taking the culture away from the all hands in approach and actually looking at how are we moving and leading moment to moment under stressful or uncertain conditions.
So that sounds great. Obviously, I think all of us would benefit from that expertise. And so, okay, so let's get into my first question, because I really want to get into your mind about how it all works. Understanding the shift. So many leaders are stuck in constant overwhelm. I mean, I was that person, right? And when
Yeah.
I was inside an organization, I led people. And so from a neuroscience point of view, what's actually happening in the brain that keeps them basically in that survival state?
So the survival brain is when we have our brain waves moving at a very rapid rate. And so this is what we usually call beta waves. So beta waves are when our brain is in stress. It essentially means that our nervous system is telling its body that we're honestly just not safe. And so what ends up happening is we start to become very hyper vigilant. We start to identify dangers or insecurities. Maybe if this comes out in the workplace, it could just be suspicions around relationships in between colleagues. It could be a state of or disposition that makes them very defensive or reactive or irritable. And so it really is kind of when it's the same state that we describe when people say she's very high strung or he's very high strung.
Yeah.
So we use that term high strung to mean being on this edge. And so what that looks like in terms of our brains is it means that the part of our brain, which is our amygdala, which is our kind of fight, flight, fawn, and freeze, that's when that kind of comes on. And it's basically our body saying, okay, we need to increase adrenaline. We need to increase cortisol. And that is basically the part of our brain that ramps us up in a dangerous situation so that we can run and we can escape the danger. But what ends up happening is if we are in that state too long and our body is prone to that state of stress, going through the various micro stressors of the day, it could be emails, Slack pings, all of these things kind of coming at us, putting out fires. We get into a very mental, emotional, and physical reactive kind of on edge, ready to attack kind of state. Whereas if we do have a much more regulated nervous system, our brain waves start to slow down. We start moving into alpha waves. Alpha waves are when we are at peace, we are grounded, we're able to stay present, we're able to make sure that our decisions are coming from a place of safety, a place of intention, a place of groundedness. So everything just kind of feels slower in a sense. It feels a lot slower. It feels a lot more sustainable, and we start feeling safe. And when our leaders feel safe on the inside, they emit that energy of safety. Their micro moments, their micro interactions embody that safety. And that's when we can actually start to influence culture and influence the way we lead.
So it's almost like the first part of your answer was really about moving like a million miles per hour. You're just go, go, go. And the second part, where you're in a sort of more like, I guess more of a calm state, it's more like in cruise mode, right? So it's kind of like, driving a vehicle, right? So auto cruise, versus just going nuts, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're in auto cruise, you can actually, stop and just take a step and breathe and do all these things. I guess that's what I'm hearing.
I guess to use that analogy, it's not that you're in cruise control. It's actually you're a lot more alert. So it's almost like the best way I can say it is when you're in this kind of stress state, it's almost like your foot is on the gas and on the brake. So
Right.
it's like you're really kind of revving the engine. You're literally burning yourself out. You're burning gas.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're kind of going and by the way, just so you know, being regulated doesn't mean that you move slower. When you are regulated, it just means that you are a lot more present. So what that looks like is
Right.
I'm here sitting across from you. My focus is on you. My intention is on this conversation. My brain's not ripping into my next meeting, which means that I can show up a lot more authentically and a lot more purposefully. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're slowing down. It just means that our brain is moving at a sustainable pace so that we can ensure that we're not getting into a state that is putting a lot of stress on our bodies and our emotions and just the way that we articulate ourselves and the way that we are softer, right? I noticed that sometimes when we're also more irritable. We tend to get into more conflicts. When we are in that beta stress, we are naturally looking for dangers. We're naturally looking for things that make us feel like, things aren't safe, things aren't going well. We start to maybe overthink, overanalyze those micro moments. One of the things that I talked about in my talk at SocialHRCamp is that Google actually did this project called the Aristotle Project. And what they found is it takes us 0.07 seconds to recognize if we're safe, if we belong, and if we are valued. So those micro expressions may turn into microaggressions if we are in that nervous state. And it does happen. It could just be, our boss is a slightly more edgy today, or, they're a bit colder to us. They usually say good morning. They don't now. They're starting to be a lot harder on us, or they start to discipline us more in terms of our performance instead of being a lot more purposeful and saying, okay, what is affecting our performance? What can I do for you? And that's the state of overflow, is being able to be present and grounded so that you can show up and serve your team as opposed to show up and react to your team.
So that was my next question, actually, about, overflow concept. And so what does it actually look like in practice? And then why is it such a powerful state or leadership state?
The beauty of being in overflow means that all of your mental, emotional, and physical needs are met. And it goes from both just an individual and a leadership point of view. So when you are in overflow, you are not in a psychological disposition that says that things are scarce. This works for employees too. If you feel like your job is danger, or, the company's running out of money or whatever, we start to get that amygdala starts to get up, making us feel like we're not safe. This company is not safe. My job security is not safe. My team doesn't trust me. All of these kind of tensions permeate through the room. So no matter what kind of culture or strategy you may have, we are permeating stress into the workplace. Overflow is when the leader shows up and says, and maybe not even just says it, but just has the energy that puts people at ease. Being able to kind of walk into a room and influence the energy of the room for the better, because you're emitting the same, neurological frequency that you're embodying. So if, let's say, I'm walking into a meeting, I'm feeling grateful, I'm feeling faithful of our success. I believe that our strategies and our tasks and everything that we're doing is on solid grounding, that we are actually in a good position. Everybody starts to see that vision as well. So it really creates a sustainable performance. It really kind of allows the culture to feel safe so that people can start to move from stress to strength, which is what I teach them. Moving from a stress state to an overflow state, which means when problems come up, we are not vulnerable, we are proactive, and we are compassionate, both to ourselves and to each other. And that increases trust, which increases performance, which increases, it makes our teams less prone to conflict. It also makes leaders less prone to burnout, less prone to stress relief. We start to increase our resilience, and we also increase our adaptability. It basically says whenever we have any issues, we see them as opportunities for growth rather than an immediate threat, because our internal state doesn't already feel like it's under threat.
I've got a question about that, and this is sort of off script a little bit. So my question is, can you fake it? And I'm asking that from a leader standpoint. So, could you fake it? Is that even possible?
I'm so happy you asked this question, because one thing that I always come across, and this is why I'm a little bit different than some of the other well-being consultants, is that the truth is you can't. The thing is you can't, because again, like I was saying, it's been scientifically proven that we are a lot more perceptive than we realize. There's actually this thing called neuroception, which means that all the micro expressions in our face, the tone of our voice, the way that we sit, the way that we stand, the way that we move, our brains are processing all of that information all the time. So even if you walk into a meeting and you have a cheerful tone, your body isn't moving the way your mouth is, right? So we have to realize that 70% maybe even more than 70% of communication is nonverbal. So even if you said the right things and acted a certain way for that 20-minute meeting, that's not going to be sustainable. People do recognize authenticity. It's kind of like when you go on a date and you're wondering if you can trust the person and they seem like a nice guy, but deep down you know that something is off.
Yeah.
We are actually, our nervous system has the capability of processing the information. It's called mental emotional resonance. When you're looking into someone's eyes of a close friend and you feel that safety, that bonding, you can't fake that. That comes from an internal state of calm and grace and just overall groundedness and really just regulation, a state, a baseline that is regulated. And when leaders can regulate, they don't need to fake it because their actions are a lot more authentic. They're a lot more service oriented. And so that's what we're really looking to shift, both in our leaders and in our culture in real time.
So I totally agree with you. I just wanted to just ask the question just to see what you would say.
A great example, I'll give you like a really quick, like micro example. They say that when someone smiles, right? When someone smiles genuinely, they have those little wrinkles in their eyes. If I just smiled like this, doesn't feel genuine, right? And
the crow's feet, that I have, that I get from my dad. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, but that is our way of processing. Yes, it's a genuine expression because his face is expressing itself, not just his mouth. And that's a great example because, again, coming from a place of overflow means that your entire body is moving from that place because everything that we are doing or expressing comes from our source, our brain and our body.
This is great stuff. So my next question is really about something different. So it's called, like as you talked about at your talk at SocialHRCamp Toronto, the inside out transformation. So how does rewiring stress pattern or emotional blocks create a sustainable change in how someone leads day to day? Can you walk us through what that inside out approach actually looks like?
Yeah. So the first stage is always going to be awareness. Okay. So we need to be aware and name this because the tricky thing with our nervous system is that most of its operations are unconscious. So we may actually be processing and internalizing stress before we even realize it. And I can speak from experience because I got into this work because I was a lived experience, like I have multiple lived experiences of full hospitalized burnout. So if I were to actually say, what does inside out transformation looks like? It starts with awareness. It's about being very clear about ourselves and understanding when we've reached our capacity. It's about recognizing what are my tells. So for example, if I feel like my chest is getting tight or my thoughts aren't very clear, or I'm noticing that my back is getting tight or my breath is getting shallow, having those awarenesses and those telltale signs that says, okay, it's time for me to take a pause, that is regulation. So when we regulate periodically, we don't accumulate the micro stressors that really break us down from the inside out. So it's all about awareness and catching ourselves, saying, hey, I just realized I was actually pretty short in that call. Is there something going on with me? And a lot of those can be physiological triggers. It could also be behavioral triggers. If you're noticing that one thing that, used to not really bother you is really quite unbearable right now, that could be a sign. Another thing is regulation. So understanding what those regulation tools are. One of the ones that I did on the talk, we did it together, was a full breath exercise. You can do it. You want to elongate your exhales. And that basically tells your body, we are safe, the threat is gone. So when we regulate, we kind of stop our stress levels from accumulating to a point of full panic, full anxiety, full stress, and full body breakdowns. Another thing is, because also another thing that's important about that is that we take it out of the automatic. So when you kind of stop, understand the signal, and regulate, you stop the automatic process of the stress accumulation. Another thing that's really important is rewiring patterns. So a lot of times, and I can speak for myself, as high functioning leaders, we have behavioral patterns that get us back into the stress state. So lack of boundaries or taking on everyone's emotion. This is true for empaths. I can speak for myself and for my other clients. If they are taking in both, and yourself included, you can see, if you are taking on the emotional energy of the room, the people around you, that can cause impact. Boundaries are not just about time or saying no all the time. It's about energetic, emotional boundaries, learning when to pull away, learning how to regulate before it becomes to a point of something that's not sustainable, and practicing those in a micro moment way. This is how we regulate ourselves. And it also builds self-trust. When you realize that in any situation you can always stop and regulate, that makes you infinitely more confident. And the team feels that. That's when we truly feel held by our leader.
Yeah.
And we truly feel held by ourselves as well.
This is all great stuff. I mean, I know from my own personal self that it's really easy to talk about this stuff, but this is really hard. Like, this is really difficult for people to actually put into practice. Really difficult. I've worked with countless leaders in my career. I'm not an expert in this whatsoever, but I'm fully aware of it, right? So, and I think a lot of people are. So, what for leaders listening right now, what 1 to 3, maybe 1 or 2 practical things that they can do this week to shift into more clarity, calm, and impact? And then maybe you can share any stories of success that may come to mind.
So one of the things that I always advocate for is what I call the reset. So one thing that I find a lot of leaders do in the state of, in the spirit of productivity, is they might do meetings back to back, or they might not give themselves enough of a time buffer in between different meetings. So when you are switching contexts and you're not giving yourself that buffer time, that's when your brain starts getting into beta. That's when it's processing too much, and we're not using our prefrontal cortex, which allows us to plan ahead and come out with a lot more foresight. So the 60-second reset is key. If you find at any point, and just do this as a practice, sit at the edge of your seat and plant your feet onto the ground. Okay. And just kind of sit up straight and just inhale through your nose for 4 seconds, exhale for 6 seconds. So we want our exhales longer than our inhales, because that activates our sympathetic system, slows everything down, makes us centered. So doing that in between meetings at any time is great. Having some time to check in with yourself, process what's just happened, process the other meeting, having those pauses. So for me, the power, for one thing that I always say is the power in the pause and the check-in. That will allow you to start to notice the signs of the stress and be able to move that from what I call stress to strength. So for example, there was one leader in tech that I knew that was constantly firefighting. So his team it's actually funny because we talked about this earlier, but his team always thought that he was on edge. That's usually what people try and call it as, they're just on edge. And the thing is, we started to work with the 60-second reset. We started to use my 5-step stress to strength formula, not just on him, but also on his team members. And everybody was showing up calmer, much more present, and way easier to talk to, which means that employees were able to go to him and actually tell them what's going on. They were able to communicate any problems that were coming up. And more importantly, they were also feeling safe enough to offer solutions, and him be able to have that space in his brain and his capacity to also see solutions. So to kind of wrap up, the stress makes us see danger and threat and insecurities, and our state of overflow and calm helps us to see solutions, safety, support. It helps us identify where we can find support in ourselves and with each other. And this really does help increase productivity by about 70%, they say, when you have a regulated team.
Culture.
Yeah.
I actually believe it, because I know for me personally, I mean, obviously I've been around it, forever. And so for me, I always make sure that I don't book too many meetings. And if I do back to back, it's very rare. So it would just be like once or twice here and there kind of thing. But the whole thing about giving yourself a break or a pause just to be able to like reset your brain because
Exactly.
and to be prepared, because I like to be really prepared. I don't like going into a meeting and not really knowing what we're talking about, what the goals are, because trying to optimize your time with other people there. You can't do that when you're just going in blind. So anyway, so I really resonate with that. I know it's a lot of our viewers will as well. So this is my last question for you. I ask everybody this. So if our viewers can learn just one thing about anything that we've talked about today, what is that one thing?
I think that the main thing is recognizing that you can't out strategize an overwhelmed nervous system. So a lot of leaders think that it's a productivity issue, it's a time issue, but you really can't pile on strategies and habits and coping mechanisms on an overwhelmed nervous state. So we need to actually work. And like I say, my website is on my camera view as well. So you can get in touch with me for some more tips and tools on how to do this. But we have to be recognizing the source of our decision making, the source of our energy levels, the source of our social skills. It all comes from our nervous system and the state that it's in, the capacity that it's at. So if there's one thing I would get my listeners to understand is that we need to regulate and we need to heal from the inside out, because it's like piling great fertilizer on dry soil, right? We need to work from our insides. We need to be checking in with our insides and understanding in what state are we operating from, because that is going to be our operations.
So like I would just paraphrase that as, getting at the root. And I use that word all the time when you're talking about, pretty much like everything in life is about getting at the root of the situation, whether it be a problem or the positive thing or a challenge. It's about really getting at the root, because if you're not, it's almost like a Band-Aid. So you're
That's it.
just sort of piling on to a problem that just gets bigger and bigger. And so very interesting insight. I could go on forever.
I do have to run, but I've had so much fun with you, and we can definitely continue this conversation.
I think so.
I'm happy to, like I say, I'm happy to, share my contact info if anyone wants to come and ask any questions. There's a lot of great ways. The good news is there's a lot of great ways for us to reset that don't take a lot of time, but they make a huge impact. They make a huge impact in the way we make decisions, in the way we support our teams, and in the way that we are creative. Even just impacting our creativity comes from a regulated place.
Rebecca, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. For all of our viewers, we'll put her contact information in the summary of this episode, so you can contact her on her website also as well. And so once again, I'm Jeff from the Unmuted Podcast. We talk about everything from HR tech, leadership, world of work, AI, and everything that connects. And so we try to drop new episodes every Thursday morning. And so we want to hear from you. So if you have any comments, thoughts, or questions, please chime in on our episodes. And so thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much. Everybody be well and feel well and do well.